Hello, my name is Christopher Gill, and this is my final project, OpenCV Machine Learning for Collector Card Matching. The goal of this project is to see if OpenCV's machine learning algorithms can be leveraged to accurately and efficiently identify collectible sports card set information without the target image having been part of the training data. OpenCV is a well-known and respected computer vision framework. The core project workflow is as follows. First, we'll install the package software. This is things like OpenCV and other required dependencies. Then we'll install project developed code. That's code that specifically runs and trains our models. Then we'll scrape some card image data from the internet. This is required because there is no readily available precompiled corpus of card image data that is nicely matched to sets. We'll do some data prep to clean up that data, and then we'll generate the feature vectors which will be used to train the machine learning models. We'll train and test those models using OpenCV, and then we'll analyze results to see applicability as well as overall accuracy and efficiency for the OpenCV machine learning algorithms. Finally, we'll generate some findings to summarize our results and understand what we've learned and whether or not OpenCV is a good choice for this task. For the purposes of this project, we'll limit our OpenCV machine learning algorithms to the SVM and R trees, also known as random forest, modeling algorithms. There are several other available machine learning algorithms within the OpenCV framework as displayed here. However, for multi-class classification problems, such as set identification for collector cards, the random trees and the SVM models should suit the topic well. One of the study topics for this project is to understand how the input data affects the performance and accuracy of OpenCV's machine learning algorithms. To this end, we'll analyze the data across a couple spectrums. The first is image size. We'll do analysis of both full-size images submitted to the algorithm as well as downsampled images to a 64 by 128 resolution. We'll also look at those images in both sizes in the RGB histogram model using 8-bin and 16-bin characterizations of the RGB histogram. And lastly, we'll do a histogram of oriented gradients method to create feature vectors for these images as well, also in both image sizes. Now to briefly talk about the software installation methods. OpenCV's machine learning algorithms require significant compute resources to execute efficiently. For the purposes of this study, we originally started on a home PC. However, that was insufficient and we had to switch to AWS's Cloud EC2 instances. We eventually scaled up to 16 virtual CPU and 122 GB RAM instance to facilitate parallel runs. And while each individual run won't require that level of resources, they are significant enough to usually require more than most desktop PCs have. It's important to note that for all cases, we leverage the Ubuntu 16.04 LTS operating system for both desktop and server flavors, depending on the hardware involved. For any code which generates visualizations, they must be run on a desktop system or with some similar X windowing system so as to provide graphical visualizations. We'll start our software installs with basic apt install packages. Many of these are simply dependencies for the building of OpenCV, which comes later. Then we'll download the OpenCV source code directly from its GitHub repository. And in step 3, we'll create a Python virtual environment so as to organize our code in a more efficient manner. In step 4, we'll install supporting Python packages. These are essentially supporting libraries which are required in order to manipulate the data and or scrape the data from the internet in order to feed OpenCV's machine learning algorithms. Once we have the prerequisites installed, we can actually build, make, and install OpenCV itself. We'll build from source here because there was a notable bug that the imshow function was not functional when using the pip install package for OpenCV. Thus, the build from source allowed us to display our visualizations. With the package software installed, we'll now move on to setting up our project-specific code. For ease of use, I've set up a GitHub repository which you can use to clone the code environment down to any machine you want to use. However, you can also download the zip file and install it that way. Just set up the folder directory structures to mirror what's pictured below on the slide. It's important to note that for this project, we used 350,000 plus images of baseball cards, and in several formats and sizes, according to our test vectors. We were unable to package that in the GitHub or zip repositories. As such, you can download them from the link seen here, and unzipping instructions are detailed in the report. These would be helpful tools if you wish to fast forward through some of the less machine learning algorithm-oriented tasks, especially the web scraping and some of the data prep steps. If you choose to go through the entire process, we'll start with the data scraping. The card information is organized on the tradingcarddb.com's website in the following method. You have years, which have sets, and sets have cards, and each card has an individual page, and on that page are the image URLs that we're interested in downloading. To facilitate gathering this data, there are several Python scripts written which can automatically download and organize the data for you. I suggest running these early as they take several days to complete. Assuming you've successfully implemented the data scraping or downloaded and set up the sample data from the previous slides, we'll proceed with a little bit of cleanup. The scraper erroneously downloads a couple reverse side images of cards. Those can be simply removed with an RM command as seen here. Next, as mentioned, one of our testing vectors is input image size. So we will use ImageMagic's convert command to create 64 by 128 resolution copies of all of our original images in a separate directory structure. Once we have the multiple sizes, we'll create RGB feature vectors for each of these sizes in both 8 and 16-bin formats. By doing this, we end up with 4 resulting data sets to feed into the machine learning training algorithm later. We'll generate a 5th data set of the histogram of oriented gradients feature vectors against the downsampled version of the images. Attempts were made to generate this dataset against the full-size images. However, this led to data files in excess of 40 gigabytes, and so was impractical to process for this application. The basic program syntax can be seen at the bottom if you choose to generate other methods, perhaps wanting to experiment with different bin sizes, or, given sufficient compute time and resources, to try out the histogram of oriented gradients feature vectors against the full-size images. With our input feature vectors generated, we'll now set up run groups testing various configurations of the random trees and SVM models. We'll also briefly test the type and quantity of data inputs to see if they have a noticeable impact as well. And finally, in run group 9, we'll do an optimal configuration, leveraging the learnings from runs 1 through 8, in a head-to-head benchmark of SVM against random trees. The training and testing process is a combined single command. You can see the command syntax pictured here, as well as sample output from the program featured at the bottom. You can see in the output that we generate runtimes for various aspects: data loaded, training time, training data accuracy testing time, and test data accuracy testing time, as well as the relevant percentage metrics and the amount of sample data used in the test and training set, respectively. While the training and testing is actually a single command, it was more efficient to generate multiple copies of this routine to facilitate parallelization of testing and running, as well as to easily control for the different control variables and configurations we wish to test. This copying method was far simpler to implementing significant logic in input arguments and confusion around which argument meant which. The last 3 programs here represent the best case scenarios. The optimize RT and optimize SVM contain hard-coded values to the observed optimum results from the previous runs. And the card classifier.py file essentially uses the defaults for both RTM or SVM depending on the input parameters. Running the program is quite simple, and a fully attributed command can be seen here, as well as a description of what this command actually means. The full run log of our experiment can be seen in the Run Result Tracking Excel spreadsheet in the Documents directory of the project code. With the ability to train and test completed, we now have to analyze our results. In controlling for the feature vector data that we feed the machine learning training algorithm and testing data, we can clearly see that the default configurations of the SVM modeler are far superior in accuracy, approaching 50%, compared to the random trees accuracy, which never exceeded 6%. While this is an obvious benefit for the SVM model, the runtimes associated with the SVM model are significantly longer and perhaps a reason for concern. Lastly, within the random trees training set itself, we did notice that the HOG data took significantly longer than the other data, despite providing the best accuracy results. In the case of the SVM models, we could not even complete some of the feature vector data runs, as they took in excess of 24 hours to run. Due to the surprisingly long run times in the previous test, a side test was orchestrated to see what the scalability ratios were for each of the models. In the random trees model, we can clearly see that runtimes, while they do increase as the number of samples increases, the accuracy dramatically drops off as well. Likewise, there's a significant downward trend in accuracy with SVM as we increase the number of samples, and also the runtime significantly increases there too. In order to balance these out, we've decided to use the 100K sample data set for the remainder of the SVM tests, as testing the larger full 350,000 sample data set was simply impractical in the timing allowed. Switching to specifically looking at the random trees model, we wanted to test several of the basic configuration parameters to see if we could tune the model to a better accuracy. The first parameter we attempted to tune was the min sample count. As we can see here, there was little change in the accuracy, or perhaps all within a range of variance, to indicate that a higher or lower sample count, minimum sample count, impacted accuracy in a meaningful way. It is possible that other parameters were so poorly tuned that the impact of this parameter was overshadowed. However, for the purposes of our optimal test, we selected the value of 8 as it was close to the default of 10 and provided the best result in our observable results. We then tested the max depth figure. More about this later, however, we ran into the barrier of OpenCV only allowing up to a value of 25 for this. There's significant trending to show that a higher value may in fact provide better accuracy with the OpenCV random trees model in our particular use case. The last configuration for random trees we tested was the max categories configuration. We again noticed a compile time limitation of 15 for the value here. We opted to use this 15 value for our optimum run in the end, as there is anecdotal evidence that the higher value for this, in a case such as matching a significant number of card sets, 17,000 different card sets in our example, the higher value would actually yield better results, but we were unable to set it to a sufficient number to really see a difference. Switching to the SVM machine learning algorithm, the first configuration there we tested was the gamma configuration. We found a clear downward trend as we decreased the gamma, we also decreased the accuracy of the model. It's worth noting that for our final optimal run, we selected a value of 2, which was not directly tested, but was in the opposite direction of our best test, and so hoping we would get an even more optimal model. The last SVM feature tested is that of C. We tested C, increasing it over the powers of 2 up to a max value of 32. and in the results we can see a clear trend upwards in accuracy. Further study should be done to see if even higher values would lead to more optimal results. However, for our optimal test run, we chose the value of 64 as it continued in the direction of the positive trend, the next iteration. With our optimum values determined from our previous tests, we chose to run a head-to-head comparison of the SVM model tuned to the R-tree model tuned. We can see in our results that the SVM model outshined the R-tree model in both cases of its defaults as well as its final tuned state. However, there's a price to be paid for the SVM model as its runtimes were significantly longer than the random trees model. The random trees model had orders of magnitude better performance, and so perhaps for a real-time processing application, like the random identification of a baseball card, the random trees model with significantly more tuning and perhaps a recompilation to fix some of the compile time limits might yield better results. As discussed, SVM showed better accuracy, but R-tree showed better performance. The only other notable result summary was that the sensible defaults for both models were horrible. Neither performed well in terms of accuracy, nor particularly well in terms of performance, though R-tree running in a couple seconds wasn't too bad. Switching to the topic of overall lessons learned, there are several key takeaways from this project. First, we may have erroneously introduced a data organization problem. Essentially, with this many sets of so few cards per set, a random sampling of the entire population of data may in fact exclude entire sets from the training data. Therefore, when sent through the testing loop, it's conceivable that data that the machine learning model has never seen before was all of a sudden being asked to classify. For a future study, we would propose taking 66% of each set's data instead of 66% of the aggregate data. A more general takeaway is that looking at the images of various cards within the corpus, we can see that within a given set, there are different visual styles of cards, making machine learning understanding these different variations are part of the same set very difficult. On a similar note, there's also different sets which have very closely related visual styles. As we can see here, a set in 1988 is almost visually identical to a set produced in 2017. These are known as throwback styles or reprints in the industry and are responsible for a large amount of collector sentiment, but really make it that much more difficult for machine learning to distinguish which set has unique characteristics. As mentioned during the results analysis, we ran into compile time settings which were artificially limited to 25 and 15 for max depth and categories respectively. Larger values of these seemed like they would increase model accuracy of the random trees model. However, we were unable to test recompiling in the time allotted for this project. A significant barrier to adoption of OpenCV machine learning algorithms is that the training models seem to be single-threaded. This caused extreme performance concerns and very long runtimes when trying to evaluate the machine learning algorithms. This led to fewer runs and perhaps less optimal tuning of the parameters. Considering these algorithms are embarrassingly parallel, especially in the random trees situation, it's almost inexcusable that the OpenCV machine learning algorithms are single-threaded. Another hindrance to the test was that there are several Python bindings missing, most notably SVM's autotrain function. These functions exist in the C++ packages, but have not been exposed to the Python packages. The good news is that the pull requests are in place for these to be in the next version of OpenCV. However, they could not be evaluated as part of this report. A last finding around OpenCV is that the Python documentation for the package is pretty poor. The C++ documentation is quite good, and in the previous 2.x versions of OpenCV, the Python documentation was actually pretty good. However, they rewrote their documentation system between release 2 and 3, and the Python documentation has not caught up yet. OpenCV readily acknowledges the problem and is committed to fixing it. However, no specifics could be found regarding timeline or actions. One more incidental finding, unrelated to OpenCV, was that NumPy performed exceedingly poorly at data loading when compared to pandas. Originally, we used NumPy to try and load the feature vectors into the training models. However, you can see that the wall times for loading very small data sets were significantly longer than what was achievable with Panda's read-CSV method. The switch to this method saved us significant time, up to 70%, and led to us being able to run a lot more tests. In conclusion, the collector card matching situation is extremely complex, both due to the nature of the data itself, in terms of visual style and reprinting, as we discussed, as well as the exceedingly large number of sets involved with relatively few samples per set. With the number of cards available approaching 2 million globally, it makes it an incredibly large data set to organize and orchestrate a machine learning algorithm to understand which set a given card is part of. Processing performance of OpenCV itself posed a significant barrier to this. Only being able to run about 50 models hindered the amount of time that we could spend tuning and tweaking to find the best accuracy. Recompiling the R-trees model and or the SVM model should significantly increase the parallelization and hopefully allow for some improved testing results. While OpenCV is unquestionably the leader in computer image input and machine learning processing for smaller data sets like object detection, gesture detection, and other highly visual skills, it really did not make sense to use in a large data set such as this. As such, we would suggest that very large data sets use other machine learning frameworks for their testing and training. However, the image capturing capabilities of OpenCV are still highly compelling, and so perhaps a hybrid solution is the best. In closing, thank you to the sources and people here for making OpenCV machine learning so approachable and easy to learn. And lastly, a very special thank you to the trading card database, tradingcarddb.com, for letting me use the images I required for this test.